April 23rd, 2019. I'd like to call the Palo Alto Parks and Rec Commission meeting to order. First off, Natalie, if you could go through the roll call, thank you.
Commissioner Cribs, Commissioner Greenfield,
Here.
Commissioner Lemire,
Here.
Commissioner McCulley, Commissioner McDougall,
Here.
Commissioner Moss,
Here.
Commissioner Rechtel,
Here.
and Council Liaison McCormick. Here.
Thank you. Do we have any agenda changes, requests, deletions that are not in the agenda as provided? If not, could we move on to oral communications then? Kristen, please.
So the oral communications are for members of the public to speak. The oral communications is for the members of the public to speak.
Do we have anybody who would like to speak on a topic that's not on the agenda tonight? Thank you. Department report. Sorry about that. Confused you. The oral department report.
Hello, Darren Anderson with Community Services Department. I've got a few items for you. A couple FYIs. There's an event coming up on, a project coming up in Palo Alto Unified School District at Hoover Elementary School that involves building some new classrooms that may involve moving portables onto the grass field. This project would start in June and go until 2023. Wow. And there are other possible impacts from the project that may affect the adjacent parkland at Mitchell Park. It's the student drop-off and pickup that would be impacted, and they're looking at other alternatives that may involve using the parking lot at Mitchell. With our last experience with the solar project at PAUSD, we wanted to bring this to your attention as soon as I became aware of it and ask if the commission would like to form an ad hoc committee to meet with staff and ultimately with PAUSD staff as well, and see if we can weigh in and help with input on this project. And perhaps I could finish the department report and we can come back to that.
Thank you.
Another event, this is unaffiliated but happening at Mitchell Park, is the Utilities Department is replacing 2 transformers. So the power will be out to the park from May 13th through May 15th. So this will include the restrooms, the tennis court lights, the irrigation, the water feature, and all the park lighting. They're going to do their best to get it completed as soon as possible. We'll make sure that we inform all the adjacent groups, the library, the schools, the community center, and everyone else in and around the park. We'll have it signed really well. But just an FYI, that's coming.
Wait, does that mean the library and the community center will be closed?
No, I'm sorry. The light control will only be going on in the park itself. So it's just the power inside Mitchell Park. This other FYI is sort of it's unsubstantiated, but a fisherman reported a gar up at Foothills Park at Bronda Lake. A gar is an invasive fish, usually the result of an aquarium release, which is kind of interesting. They can grow from 1 foot to 9 feet long. This isn't the first time we've had this happen. 10 years ago, we had a similar report, and we did the same thing we did this time. We contact California Fish and Wildlife Service. They send out a biologist. We electroshock parts of the lake looking for this fish. And electroshock is essentially putting in a battery-powered, a little electrifier, shocks a little portion of the lake, and fish are stunned momentarily, rise up to the top, and you can see if you've got any invasive ones, in particular this gar that we're looking at. So in this instance, the fish and wildlife biologist came out again and did survey and didn't find it again. But just want to let you know, if you hear about it, we're on top of it, we're looking, we're communicating with the fisher, the people who are fishing at the lake on a regular basis to educate them about what the gar looks like, and if you catch them, please do not re-release it. We'd like to capture that, freeze it. We call Fish and Wildlife Service. And just an FYI, there are 5 of the 7 gar species that are native to the United States, but none of which are in California. And I'll turn it over to Kristen.
So I have some things to share as well. Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. Mine are about 2 special events that are coming up. The first is Palo Alto Day. So as you probably know, hopefully that this year is Palo Alto's 125th birthday. And there's an event occurring on King Plaza this Sunday at 2 o'clock to celebrate Palo Alto Day. It's a community event put on by different members of the community, not just the city, just to celebrate and also to open a time capsule that was buried here in City Hall 25 years ago. So there were 3 time capsules buried 25 years ago, one to be opened this year in 2019, and then one in another 25 years, and maybe another 50 years after that. But so we're going to open that. We're going to have just a fun celebration. There'll be some singing groups, and I encourage you all to attend. So the actual program starts at 2 o'clock, but there's some music that starts at 12:45. And again, on King Plaza this Sunday. The second one, I wanted to remind everyone of the May Fete Parade that is happening the following weekend on Saturday. And I do have a request. We are looking for some judges to judge the floats at the May Fete Parade. If anyone is interested, we would greatly appreciate it. It's requires that you get there a little bit earlier at 9:15, but you do get to vote on all the floats and, make some kids feel very special that day. So if anyone is interested, please let me know. And again, if you haven't let Stephanie Douglas know if you'd like to walk in the parade, please do so we can make sure we have the right number of people accounted for. So 2 sort of fun community events coming up, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
So Darren, would you like to go back to the question about the ad hoc? Which school did you say that was?
This is Hoover Elementary.
Hoover.
Yeah, just to revisit it, I think it might be helpful to form an ad hoc if the commission feels that would benefit the process. I'd be glad to help work with the ad hoc and connect them with POSD staff and see if we can discuss this project in more detail.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Greenfield?
I'd be happy to be involved with that. I live down the street on Waverly Street where they're, and I know part of the transportation plan they're talking about is potentially opening up Waverly Street as a one-way road for drop-off.
That's correct.
And because the issue, and I know Hoover School is trying to do some outreach, so this is a good time to plug the message a little bit for the people who are listening, if you're nearby and involved. As part of the construction, the loop through the school area will be closed. It'll be dead-ended on the side adjacent to the home on the other side. So the traffic will either have to turn around and then go through Waverly Street or go back out the way they came. So it's a problem in any way you look at it, but I'd be happy to be involved with that.
That'd be great.
Is there anybody else who would like to join that? I hate to think the fact that you would do it alone, so I'll volunteer to participate with you.
Love to spend more time with you, Don.
People are going to start talking. So that's good, and I think we should make sure that, certainly express here the appreciation that the school board reached out. I think that should not go unnoticed. So the next item.
I just had one question regarding the utilities issue at Mitchell Park. Will that affect the tennis and pickleball courts?
Yes, the lighting in all the courts.
So no lights on May 13th through 15th?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Darren or Kristen? In that case, I'd like to move on to approval of the minutes. Hope everybody's had a chance to review them. Are there any comments or suggestions, changes, or can I have a motion?
I so move.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Objections? So passed as provided. The next item is recommendation to City Council to adopt a park improvement ordinance at Mitchell Park. And I'd like to invite Adam Howard to participate with Darren to make that presentation. For the audience, I have 3 cards here. The process will be that we'll hear the presentation. If I have cards, you'll be invited to speak, and then the commission will speak, and then there'll be a motion. So thank you all for being here. Remember the thoughtful and peaceful approach that we've witnessed from all of you before. So Adam?
Thank you. Good evening, Adam Howard, Senior Services Manager, Community Services Manager. Thank you. It's been a long day. I apologize. Thank you for having me here. Yes, we are here to receive a recommendation to send forward a park improvement ordinance for the Mitchell Park courts. Just a brief background, as we've discussed this before, but we've seen an increase here in Palo Alto of pickleball play. Our first step to kind of helping with that solution was to update the court policy to allow for pickleball play to happen here in Palo Alto. So August 28th, we brought a recommendation changes to the court use policy to the commission. And you sent it forward to the City Council, who approved on October 15th. Again, we realized that was the first step, and really what we needed to do was provide some designated space for the pickleball users. So February 19th, staff held a public meeting to discuss redesign plans at Mitchell Park. And on February 26th, we came back and reported that back to you. So what you'll see is really the same plan designs from that previous meeting with just a little bit more detail and in the form of a PIO. The paperwork in front of you is some changes that took place since the since the PIO was sent, and they're really just changes to the note section of the diagram. The wording is all the same, but the note section, there were some things that didn't correlate with the picture that you see, so we wanted to make sure that those corrections came forward to you. So for tonight, the park improvement ordinance focuses on these 6 things. The removal of 4 trees, and then replanting additional trees according to the city arborist's replanting recommendation. Install 2 new pickleball courts and new perimeter fencing that is currently outside of the passive grass area and adjacent to the existing tennis courts. Install a new concrete walkway along the exterior of the new pickleball courts. Convert 1 tennis court, existing court 5, into 4 dedicated pickleball courts. Stripe the 2 existing courts 6 and 7, into multi-use courts, so both tennis and pickleball will allow to be shared. And install 1 drinking fountain adjacent to the courts for everybody's use. So this is just an overhead image of Mitchell Park courts 5, 6, and 7. You have seen this before, but we'll go into little detail of each of those steps that I just talked about. So the first is the removal of 4 trees. The red large circles are the current location of those trees, and just a picture of those trees. As you can see, 3 palm trees, and I don't remember the name of the larger tree, but that you can see them where they are adjacent to the tennis courts currently. So those would be removed, and the recommendation would be to replant. At this point, it's 7 trees that we're looking at replanting in Mitchell Park. And that most of that will go in the new kind of designed landscaping area, but some of them might actually go other places in the park. This is the overhead of where the new pickleball courts and perimeter fencing will remain. So as you can see, that we're basically bumping out where the current perimeter fence is to this new red line, and that's where the 2 new pickleball courts will go. We would install a new walkway along the exterior of the fence. That's what the yellow image is representing, and that way we have a concrete walkway around the new existing perimeter fence. This shows the converting of court 5 into 4 designated pickleball courts. We would then dual stripe court 6 and 7 to provide both tennis and pickleball use with the previous mentioned designated times for each sport. The red little circle there is where the water fountain will be located. There is also a water fountain in the Magical Bridge playground, so this will be the second water fountain in the area. And just as kind of an overview and recap, this plan gives 8 designated pickleball courts, which does include the 2 recently redesigned paddleball courts, 4 designated tennis courts, which were all lit, and then 2 multi-use courts, 2 tennis, or 7 pickleball courts, all with lights. So the steps moving forward, if the recommendation goes forward tonight, is to bring the Park Improvement Ordinance to City Council in May. While doing that, also finishing the Planning Department permit. So those 2 will be happening at the same time. The hope would be to get council to approve the contract in July, with construction starting in August and completion in October. Questions or comments?
So I'd like to go to the public speakers. If anybody is planning on speaking, I'd appreciate it if you submit cards now. We've had the situation before where people have wanted to speak afterwards, and I'm afraid we can't allow that. So I'll wait 1 minute. While we're waiting to go in order that the cards were submitted, I'll start with Harvey Alcabez. I hope I have that right. And next is Kay Carey, if they can be ready.
Hello. Hello. My name's Harvey Alcabez. I'm a longtime Palo Alto resident. Have been a tennis player for a while, and in the last year I started playing pickleball, and I found that it's something that a lot of people really enjoy, and that while the tennis courts, there's generally been enough, pickleball is very, very fast growing. Even from last summer until now, there is a lot more players. And in one court, we can have 16 people playing in what would be one tennis court where up to 4 people could play. So I just want to recommend that the council approve this request.
Thank you. Kay Carey, followed by Ann Lemons.
Good evening. I'm Kay Carey, longtime Palo Alto resident, past president of Palo Alto Tennis Club. I've recently tried pickleball. It's certainly fun. I think that this has been a very thoughtful plan that has been put forward by the rec department and is a useful compromise so that we can have both tennis players and pickleball players getting court usage. I hope, though, that the committee or commission is going to be monitoring the usage of the courts, because ultimately it would make a lot of sense to think about Coverly as a pickleball center. For example, I believe $80,000 is being spent for the 2 new pickleball courts. It would be interesting if instead $100,000 was spent to light 2 Coverly courts, which could be mixed use, that is 8 pickleball courts or 2 tennis courts. Just a suggestion, because the parking problems at Mitchell are severe. Coverly makes sense as a pickleball center. It doesn't have a nice little viewing area, which would be a wonderful thing to put in. So I just wanted to make the suggestion that as you were continuing to monitor it, you might be thinking in terms of where do you want your pickleball center to be, and I think it would be difficult to have it at Mitchell Park. but I certainly commend this plan as a good transition plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Lemons, followed by Lee Caswell.
Hi, my name is Ann Lemonis, and I'm a Palo Alto resident and property owner. I want to thank you, first of all, for all your hours, days, weeks, months, and years of work on this project. I think the proposal is really a good one. It doesn't overly benefit pickleball nor unduly harm the tennis community. So thank you very much. Please approve.
Thank you. Lee Caswell, followed by Monica Williams.
Hi, my name is Lee Caswell. I'm a longtime tennis player and also even longer time Palo Alto resident. And so, I do recommend moving forward. I think it's a very thoughtful proposal, a balance of pickleball and tennis. What I wanted to talk about just for a minute, though, was just the nature of this game and how, from a community standpoint, it really does, by compressing the skill set, allow people to interact in a way that is really indicative of how I think we want Palo Alto to behave. We are bringing people from different ages. I've played with everyone who's a pickleball player here at different times. Although I was a competitive tennis player, I'm able to play with a group of people that is really a big range of folks, different sexes, different ages, and so it's really been my pleasure to be part of that. Also interesting, I am the spouse of a school board member, and so I do happen to just run into people all from, all different schools and, kids who are participating in a sport where it's not easy to enter tennis the same way as it is to get into pickleball. And so we're really enthusiastic about having dedicated courts. It's a pretty big drag on the pickleball players to bring all these courts in every week. I mean, the setup and downtime of this is quite an effort, and I think this is going to go a long way towards improving the kind of enjoyment of the game, number one, and also a little bit on safety, too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Monica Williams, followed by Susan McConnell.
Good evening, Chair McDougall and the Commissioners. I'm Monica Williams, President of the Palo Alto Pickleball Club, and I want to thank you for this proposal. 4 years ago, an article in the Mercury News called me a 73-year-old pickleball goddess. That was 4 years ago. So I'm absolutely delighted that you have brought this to fruition, and we're looking forward to having this facility at Mitchell Park. We'll be able to teach a lot more youth, and this gives us the possibility of people just coming in and playing rather than having to put up a net. And that's why, with our youth, we want to have them just be able to come onto the courts and be able to practice. There's nowhere else to be able to do that without putting up courts. So having the dedicated courts is really fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to also say that for those people who are not speaking tonight, and we want to respect your time, so we don't want to take too much of your time, to have those people who are supporting pickleball just to stand up, please. So thank you. That looks like 100%. So thank you, and the proposal is fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Susan McConnell.
Hi, my name is Susan McConnell, and I'm a member of the Palo Alto Pickleball Club and a resident of Palo Alto for 46 years. For 18 years, I captained many Palo Alto USTA teams until my knees gave out. This past Monday morning, when I arrived at Mitchell Park to play pickleball, there were 44 people playing on 3 tennis courts with people waiting to go on the courts. I looked when I came in, and there were, I believe, only 2 tennis players on your newly resurfaced courts. We have a very vibrant pickleball community at Mitchell Park. In fact, there's a vibrant pickleball community throughout the United States. We support the plan proposed by the Palo Alto Parks and Rec Department to change one tennis court, number 5, into 4 dedicated pickleball courts. Dual lines will be put on courts number 6 and 7. This is a fair compromise. Tennis players will have 21 lit courts instead of 22. Thank you. I sure hope this goes through.
Thank you. I'd like to now convert to talking with the Parks and Rec Commission. I think I'll start, David, with you.
Thank you. I've been starting to play pickleball, and I've noticed this camaraderie, and I think it's fantastic that you have this focus in one geographic area. I noticed that there are 2 pickleball courts that used to be paddleball courts, and almost nobody uses them. So having that focus is really great, and I'm very happy that you're creating this center in Mitchell Park and not, for instance, putting 2 or 3 courts at Coverly and 2 or 3 courts somewhere else. I don't think they'll be used like they're used at Mitchell Park. It's just fantastic. I also heard for the first time a seating area for watching, and I've never heard that before in the year and a half, and I don't know if that's possible to put a two-layer bleacher or something like that somewhere.
Yeah, so this has kind of been part of the conversation. We looked at like full set of bleachers, but we couldn't put down a pad due to the proximity to the creek. But in the landscaped area, we do hope to include some picnic-style benches so people can sit, enjoy the shade, and enjoy watching the game.
Okay. Also, can you tell me what is between the 2 new courts and the existing court 5 in the way of fencing? Is there a half fence? Is there no fence? What's between the 2 when you're done?
So in between the courts, though, we'll have dividing fences, basically, that are used in pickleball. But the cement walkway that's there now will be removed, right. So all the surface will be the same, and then they'll just have the little dividers that divide each of the courts. It'll be a very low, I don't even know if I'd call it a fence, but it's 3 feet high.
Okay, because there's one that already exists between court 5 and 6. There's a little half fence that
right.
Is that going to be similar between?
It would probably be even lower than that. Okay. And that fence will actually be extended a little bit so that tennis and pickleball could be at the same time without interference.
Okay. And I'm really happy to see every time I go by there the ability of the pickleballers and the tennis players to share that, the court 6 and 7, and I encourage us to keep working on that. That's really working out great. Thank you.
We're going to go to the other end. Commissioner McCauley.
Adam and Darren, this has been a long time coming. Congratulations. Well done.
Commissioner Lemaire.
Appreciate all your hard work on this. It's a great plan. A couple of things, though, that came to mind just in terms of long-range thinking. I was really excited to see you able to bump out and use existing land and expand things at the park, and to continue to look at our different parks and how land can be used in efficient ways is exciting. And then to think about, and I know we've talked about it a lot, but to continue to study where can we put lights up and where does it not impact the residents, and where, like what parks can we really put lights up, whether it's for tennis courts, soccer fields. Our population is growing. It's going to get more and more impacted, so to continue to find different ways to utilize our space. But congratulations on this. I know you guys have worked very, very hard. You've engaged the public, and excited to see this plan come to fruition.
Okay, I'll say me too. Thank you very much. I also appreciate October completion date. That's very good. It's very. I know you've worked very hard to squeeze that through, so I appreciate that. Refresh my memory. What are the dedicated hours right now in Mitchell Park for pickleball?
Currently?
Currently.
So I'm not going to remember the name. It's Monday and Wednesdays is one group, and Tuesdays and Thursdays is the next. I can't, maybe they remember which one's which off the top of their heads. And then the rest of the remaining evenings is first come, first serve.
Okay, so we do have some evening slots right now.
Yeah, so right now there's it's 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Monday and Wednesday is one sport, and 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday is the other sport. I just can't remember which night is which, but.
And if we look down, do we get a lot of pickleball in the evening?
Yeah, especially now that the weather's improving.
Okay, so these new courts, we're not going to put lights up. Do we know, do we get extra light bouncing off the courts? Are they playable in the evenings, these new courts?
You know, we're not sure. There is going to be some light, but we don't know if it'll be enough light. We're not positive about that. We can't redirect, so we're not positive.
Oh, the current lights are fixed?
Yeah.
And if we wanted to add lights to these courts down the road, is this minor? I mean, I think it's like $100,000 to do a court.
Yeah, and I think Darren might remind me if I'm wrong. I think they gave us a quote of $70,000 to light if we wanted to light the addition.
Oh, okay.
And I might add that there's also the permitting process, which is complicated, more complicated when it comes to lighting things. Of course, the adjacent lights are lit, so that will help. It's not like a totally unlit area, but adding additional lights in parks is sometimes a challenge.
Okay.
But I think it's certainly, Commissioner Lemaire pointed out, as we try to maximize space, we'll certainly be looking at options to light a number of areas.
And the fact that we already have lights there, I assume that would simplify it?
I would think so.
But the $70,000 quote was including the fact that they could tie into the existing lights?
Right, because they had been to the court before, so they knew that.
And I just want to qualify that $70,000 wasn't fully vetted. It was an envelope estimate.
Just a ROM estimate. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, and finally, I like the benches over the trees, and actually the fact that they're movable I think will be a feature, because in the morning the sun is going to be coming from the right side here, and so you may want, if you want shade, you'll want the benches on the left, but in the afternoon it may be reversed. So the fact that they're not free, and that they're not fixed is a good thing. How wide is that strip of grass right now? Is it 10 feet?
Currently or in the design?
When they build it?
Do you remember? 10, yeah, it was roughly 10 feet.
Okay, so if you put the trees in the middle, you could move the picnic table back and forth, something like that. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to this being heavily used. When I walk through the park, the pickleball is very heavily used, more so than tennis. So I think this is the right decision.
Commissioner Greenfield?
I'd like to thank staff and the community for the collaborative effort in getting to where we are today. It's been a long process. A lot of people have been along for the ride for a long time, and I'm happy to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I've nitpicked plenty of details within the ad hoc. I'm going to say I'm happy with things as they are, and congratulations.
I can only echo the appreciation for the work, Adam, and the stamina that has come into this. I think we should also comment both the pickleball particularly and the tennis people for both their persistence and stamina in this, because it's been a necessarily long process, because I think you've done an incredible job of making sure everybody's voice was heard. I have no other comments or questions, just to say thank you to you and everybody that worked with you and helped you. With that said, if there are no other comments, and I would comment, by the way, I turn and look at Allison, and we have we have developed the practice of inviting Councilmember Cormack to speak at our meetings on our topics. The next thing that happens with this item is it goes before council, and she has suggested it would be inappropriate to participate today because she'll be participating on this in the future. So thank you for your understanding. The next thing then would be a motion, and the motion would be, would somebody like to give us the specifics of the motion? Is that a slide that we can look at, or? Heaven forbid we make something
If
up.
I might suggest one, I would move to recommend that the City Council adopt the park improvement ordinance that's before us.
Yeah, is this what you want us to, is this the definition here? This would be the appropriate wording. Ryan, would you like to?
I move that the commission recommend to the City Council that it adopt the park improvement ordinance at Mitchell Park for constructing 2 pickleball courts, converting court 5 into 4 pickleball courts, and restriping courts 6 and 7 for dual use.
Is it useful to add anything about and the appropriate amenities? Or does that just come with it?
Yeah, I think you can leave it as is.
As is?
The PIO includes that, and it gives us a little flexibility.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Anybody in favor? All in favor, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? With that, it's passed unanimously, and thank you again to the attendees. Thank you again to the staff and the commission. All right.
Okay, we're lonely again.
I'm pretty sure a good chairman would have asked them to be quiet and show all sorts of decorum and whatever, but after this length of time.
You want to read a new parade?
Absolutely.
There's not a lot of times that...
And besides, I had half the commission clapping with them, so.
Usually people grumble about city government, so the fact they're happy is a good thing.
That's right. We should celebrate this moment.
Yes. Remember how good it feels.
That's right.
They're not yelling at us.
Don't get used to this. So the next item on the agenda is preparation for the council study session. Kristen, do you want to start off and provide some context, or?
Sure. So we have, as you know, a joint study session. It's currently scheduled for May 6th. I was just trying to pull up the time. It's a little later than we usually do because there's, I think, a special order in another study session that same day. We had also, just a side note, planned for the Cubberley joint study session between council and the school district. That's been moved probably till later in the summer, so that one is not on May 6th, but typically what the process is for these study sessions is the chair and the vice chair and staff will meet with the mayor and the vice mayor. In this instance, we met with the mayor and Councilmember Cormack, which was actually a really good fit for this study session. The vice mayor will not be there on May 6th, so he deferred to Councilmember Cormack. And what we did at that meeting is just talk through what Chair McDougall will likely present at the meeting on behalf of the commission, which would be accomplishments from the previous year and then priorities for the coming year or the current year. So I think tonight we can, I'll turn it over to you, Chair McDougall, but I think it would be good for the commission to know, generally what the presentation will be and if there's any particular focus you'd like to take the study session, and just a little bit of choreography maybe would help as well. So I'll turn it over to you, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have along the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we met with Mayor Filseth and Councilmember Cormack, and I want to thank her for being there and her participation in that meeting. It was very, very useful. I'd like this not to be my presentation, but our presentation. What we have in front of you is, I said earlier today that it was a summary version, but then I changed that to say it was a redacted version because that seems to be the term of use these days, of what we presented that day. And I put it this way just so that we're not sitting here saying, oh, remember the bridge, oh, remember that. Hopefully most of the things that we would remember are here. And I would suggest that the presentation or discussion be more or less in this direction, but what we really need to do is see if we can come to agreement of what we'd like to achieve. Would we like to achieve the fact that they should be confident that the Parks and Rec Commission is doing a good job, or should we try and achieve the fact that they should be looking at something in particular? Should we achieve that some warnings about what we think is coming in the future? There's any number of things that we can do. And through this conversation, I'd like to invite Commissioner Greenfield to interrupt me at any time because he was instrumental in doing this. So the agenda we had for that meeting was we just put up the priorities and thoughts and what the citizen input was. We talked about highlights and activities and celebrations. I put in the guiding principles outcome that we had from our meeting because I didn't think that just simply priorities covered what we were trying to do. And it says CSD PRC projects. None of these are our projects. They're very much CSD projects, and they're very much, in fact, public works projects that CSD is substantially leading. And to that end, we wanted to make sure that it was understood what our role was relative to the overall organization. I did talk about funding sources and some of the data that I've used before. I don't think that, I'm going to say right now, I don't think that that's meaningful in a general council conversation. What I learned from this meeting is if you want to talk in big numbers, you can't, that doesn't last for more than about 30 nanoseconds before it's in small numbers, and the small numbers are, number one, not our business, and number two, they're way too movable to really bring in front of council in this fashion. The thing that I bolded there was the challenges and projects of interest, and I'll count on Commissioner Greenfield to help me talk about that. So just quickly, under the introduction, I think it's useful to continue to reinforce that Parks and Rec is really responsible for what I would consider to be, and I've used this term before, scarce and valuable resources. And I put up the city, the council priorities because climate and sustainability are part of that. I put up the mayor's values, and he didn't argue with them, from his presentation, which included sustainability in nature and sustainability in fiscal responsibility and a healthy city, healthy community, and being a good neighbor. And then I did talk about the citizen survey and the great marks that the parks and open space received in the citizen survey. Natalie, can you slide that up, or you've got it? Thank you. The highlights, there are the recreation highlights. I'm not going to go through them. You can read them. The parks highlights, the open space, the infrastructure, and other, the concept of partnership development, the fact that we had several different organizations come and speak to us, and we looked to engage with those organizations. The highlighting has more to do with, and there, in fact, some version of it, there was color in there. It had more to do with which were the ones that the mayor, in fact, called out in his speech, not necessarily the really important. There are things that were more important than others. Christian, can you go to the next? The priorities, these are divided into sort of sections. There's priorities that are part of both the CIP and master plan projects, and they're listed there. There's specific park projects. There's specific CSD projects. The Cumberley Master Plan and Recreation Opportunity Analysis, and you might throw BCCP is up there earlier. Those are just activities that are going on. And then as you talk about priorities, I think for this commission and for the city and whatnot, climate change is incredibly high. And certainly from my position, funding needs and opportunities and strategies is important. And then in terms of challenges, we said there was projects of current public interest. We think that the Baylands, BCCP, including the ITT building, including the 10 acres, will solicit and involve community conversation. The Ventura plan will clearly include that. We happily, I think, present them with a really nice racket sports package. And then there's the whole conversation of park dedication. And then projects of potential public interest, the Foothills Creek hydrology and restoration, and then funding strategies. We talked a lot about that with Commissioner Cormack or Councilmember Cormack and the mayor. And then the other, in terms of challenges, is clearly climate change. So that's a very quick overview. I would invite comment first from Commissioner Greenfield about that meeting and how we should proceed with the council.
Thank you. One thing we're certainly mindful of is we're talking about a 60-minute meeting, and there's 14 individuals who all like to talk on varying levels. 60 minutes, 1 hour. And so really we want to jump to the meat of any meeting as quickly as we can. And that's really what the outline of the pre-meeting with the mayor and Councilmember Cormack was. We outlined a number of things, ran through them quickly, highlighted the last item, which was the challenges that we wanted to spend the most time talking about, getting feedback on specific projects, what makes sense. One thing that we did hear, which was useful, regarding the 10.5 acres at the Baylands, there has been previous guidance from previous councils that area would be targeted towards recreation development. I think it would behoove us to address this with the current council to make sure that the guidance is still the same before we move forward with trying to develop that. I think that is a priority for the commission right now, is to figure out what are we going to do with that land area. It's a good time to be talking about it, but before we can make very specific plans in a specific direction, I think we need some guidance, and be happy to have your comments on that as well.
Thank you so much. I think this is an area where each council member have various, background and understanding, and we only have one member of council who has a long history of experience. So I think the recommendation that you all bring forward should probably include pros and cons, some information on both sides, in addition to what you recommend. I'll just say personally, when I get staff reports, that if there's a couple options, then I have a better sense of why there's been a particular recommendation. So, and it's possible that the commission may not agree, right? So that's fine, recognize that. I'd just say that, just doing a holistic approach to not just, some people a while ago said that, maybe that will be, stare decisis, and we'll stick with that. So that would just be my one suggestion in that area, especially with respect to sea level rise, right? So we've got a bunch of things going on now that's new information, frankly.
Is that recommendation specific to the 10.5 acres or any of these topics?
It's specific to the 10.5 acres, but it's also general to me.
Thank you.
I'll continue if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Greenfield.
Another comment I'd make is in the section of the projects of current public interest, the Baylands, the BCCP, and the 10.5 acres, the Matura and the racquet sports all speak for themselves. You may wonder what park dedication is doing on that list. It's something we've talked about, but hasn't been a specific project of effort. We were looking for guidance on, is this something that is important to the council to pursue? Because there's question about how much effort we should put into pursuing it. And actually, there are questions about dedicating parks before we came up to it in this portion of the presentations. And so the general feedback we got is there is interest in looking for park areas that should be dedicated. And so right now I have a liaison role with Kristen, and I'll pursue that. And if anybody wants to join me on that effort, they're welcome to.
I'm going to ask Councilmember Cormack if she has any other points of guidance from that meeting.
I think the upcoming decisions is actually, if you start with the achievements from last year, I think that's the important thing to start with, right? Don't sell yourselves short, and make sure staff gets all the credit that they deserve. And then the upcoming decisions, I think, is definitely where we should spend most of the time. I think it's always helpful for any of us to get a heads up, before something arrives. I think there are two things on this list that might not jump out to your average council member. And one is the recreation opportunity analysis. I'm not sure that's something that people would necessarily know about, so you might want to spend a little time talking about, taking a step back and where that came from at the retreat. And then the other thing, when we had the budget presented last night, one of the items on the list of how we are going to achieve our fiscal sustainability did include public-private collaborations. So while I realize that it's early to talk about quote-unquote fundraising, I think it's probably a good time to mention that that's on your radar, your planning horizon as you look for appropriate projects and appropriate partners. So I just encourage you to mention that. Those are the things that jump out to me from this list.
Yeah, Commissioner Greenfield, go ahead.
And one more comment I would make is regarding the Foothills Park Buckeye Creek Restoration Project and hydrology study. As you know, in 2017, we passed a motion recommending the the middle option of three in terms of the restoration of just the upper portion of Buckeye Creek in Wild Horse Valley in the $4 million range, rather than recommending the full-blown $10 million project, which would include that area as well as Las Trampas Valley and the Buckeye Flats, 7.7 acres. Some guidance we got is if we were to find funding sources, outside funding sources for the whole package, we shouldn't worry about the fact that we've only recommended the middle option, and if there is, in the event that we were able to find someone or some group that was interested in pursuing the full package, we can solve that problem later. Find the money, and everything else can fall into place, essentially.
Agreed. So I'm going to go down, start the other end. Ryan, do you have anything, add any suggestions, anything you'd like to achieve?
So first off, I think that this is a very thoughtful approach to the meeting with Councilmember Cormack and the mayor, so well done on that count. I actually think that having a brief handout that perhaps lists the 2018 accomplishments might be good. Doesn't need to be lengthy. I think you can probably just have it be what you already have here almost, maybe with, a few words to describe some of the things that the council members may not be aware of. And that way we can spend maybe 5 minutes on that and then really spend the majority of the time talking about what we foresee coming up in the next year. And so on that note, there is another item which I think that several people know about on the commission, which is access to Foothills Park for students from neighboring communities. And so I don't know if there was any feedback, Dawn or Jeff or Allison, on that topic, but I'd be interested to hear thoughts on that. The ad hoc committee, and we can talk about it a little bit more when we get to the ad hoc updates, but has been moving forward with that concept. So we can discuss it in more detail then at the ad hoc update phase, but I'm curious to know where that one stands and whether we should talk about it with the council or not, if for no other reason, just then to let them know that we're exploring it. So thoughts on that one?
So you and I talked briefly about this, and I would say the biggest concern from both of the participants was, what problem are we solving? That was the question that got asked. And I would encourage that the ad hoc, and however we go about it, try and answer that question. And my position would be, if we think we can answer that question articulately, and that we're not necessarily, then I think we could bring it up as there's a problem we're trying to solve, and we should solve it this way. If we can't answer that question articulately, then I think, I don't know what expression to use, we should keep our powder dry or whatever, that warning them it may, and bringing it up as a possible discussion could sidetrack everything else, number one, and could cause, I worry that a negative minority kind of thing could escalate into something that we'd never achieve what you'd like to achieve.
I entirely appreciate that sentiment. I hear you. And the ad hoc has actually talked about this, which is that this may not be the best forum in a session with the council, which is very kind of compressed and quick, to bring up a topic that probably deserves a little bit more in-depth discussion. I would offer, just in response to the question that you posed, which is a totally fair question, I would offer, though, that really what it is it's a kind of a question of social justice, right? And so there are perhaps competing narratives about how we got to where we are with Foothills Park and the residents' exclusiveness requirement. One is that Palo Alto was the community that stepped up to preserve that area and put the money up in the first instance. Other communities weren't willing to pony up at that point in time, and so Palo Alto, somewhat understandably said, okay, but this is going to be for Palo Alto residents. There's a counter narrative, which some of us have probably heard, which is that Palo Alto is a white flight suburb of the 1950s and 60s, and exclusive resident facilities and parks and things like that were a symptom of those sorts of mentalities, which effectively were to keep the riffraff out of what was an exclusive area. I'm not going to try and resolve what narrative is the right one, but that's, at least from some people's view in our community, what's underlying the whole issue. And so I think it really is a social justice issue, which we can either clean up ourselves or probably become, the headline of local newspapers, or perhaps even beyond local newspapers, that Palo Alto is potentially still promoting that sort of exclusiveness in a facility that in most places would be open to the entire public. I also think there's probably multiple ways to accomplish it. This proposal is intended to be a pretty targeted way. It's a pilot proposal to study whether there would be any impacts from allowing students from neighboring communities that are in socioeconomically disadvantaged schools to come to Foothills Park. The park is a resource which is underutilized. Actually, it's pretty significantly underutilized. Many of our resources within the park system are overutilized. Foothills Park is one that's actually underutilized. And so we have excess capacity, and that's really the genesis. So I didn't mean to speak for so long, but I think that's the answer, at least from my perspective, which is it's a social justice issue that we can either rectify ourselves or, as I said, become perhaps publicized in ways that we don't want to be publicized.
I'm going to move on. I've got understanding and notes of that, and I appreciate your passion on that. And we'll go to Commissioner Lemaire.
No, I don't have anything additional to add, although I do support Ryan in his comments, as well as exploring the Foothills Park and the pilot program.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to investigating this. I don't think a council joint study session would be the place to do it. I'd be afraid that it would swamp all our other discussions. So we have a lot of very nebulous things. We will have new parkland at Cubberley, Ventura. The 10.5 acres, what are we going to do there? That's very nebulous. The 7.7 acres is very nebulous. How to approach funding, there's not a clear answer to that either. And so normally what we do is we do the churn, and then we just shut up and listen. And in this case, I think we want to listen to the council and see what they have to give us guidance on these areas. And that these areas are areas where there isn't an obvious answer, and guidance from the council will be needed.
I think it's a good point that we want to make sure that we don't spend an hour talking. We spend 15 minutes addressing and identifying issues and making sure that we're listening and getting guidance as opposed to trying to tell them what. Commissioner Moss?
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. You had said in the beginning that this was our presentation, not your presentation. So are you going to divvy this up among the 7 of us, or 3 of us, or 4 of us? And as you said, you don't want to monopolize the entire 60 minutes with us just talking heads. You want a discussion. And so I don't know how you want to handle that. And do you want the liaisons and the subcommittees to be prepared to talk about any of these issues in greater depth in 60 minutes? So what did you have in mind?
So I think there's two answers to that. One is, I'm not sure I want anybody to talk in greater depth in any of those. I think we want to identify topics and issues. We want to be very careful about us talking so much that in greater depth that we don't hear. On the other hand, I would like to go through the various ad hocs and have a representative of an ad hoc talk about some of these topics, rather than me simply going through the list. We have a slide of accomplishments. We have a slide of priorities. I think I could take ad hocs and divide that up. I would try my best to create what's called a TikTok, which Joe Smidian is very famous for creating TikToks, so that we really knew minute by minute what it was we were trying to do. And we can't control the council speaking, but we can control ourselves speaking. And if everybody knows that, yes, I have this topic and I have 2 minutes, it's not free form. We'll use our light here or something. But I would prefer to divide it up. And I would know sort of what priorities people have by what ad hocs they're on.
I did want to hear if Councilman McCormick had any more comments, but one other question, and that is that there are some things here that are more controversial, they're not fully fleshed out, and for instance, the AT&T property, things like that. How much detail do we even bring those up, or is this the set list?
This is not necessarily a set list. We did not put the AT&T property on here because there's already action on that probably can't be discussed in a setting like that. Kristen, do you have comments to add on that?
I do. I just wanted to chime in a little bit, and I think what Commissioner Rectal was saying is based on past practice. So my experience is the best part of these study sessions is the dialogue between the council and the commissioners, and the way to accomplish that is to give the most time for that dialogue. I worry if everyone is participating in the presentation, it's going to take a long time for that presentation. So my recommendation is that the chair and vice chair give the presentation together. It's not their presentation, they're there representing all of you. And then that, the conversation, more feedback and dialogue with council can take place. That would be my recommendation, and it's based on how we've done it previously. So I'd welcome your thoughts on that, but I would be worried that all of a sudden 30 minutes would pass and we still haven't heard from the city council.
With that approach, I would go out of my way to make sure that everybody participated in answering any kind of conversation that got started. I would not want to be the one, or necessarily Commissioner Greenfield, the one to so a topic comes up and maybe almost random, as opposed to, Commissioner Rectal, why don't you talk to that? And if you're comfortable talking to it, then do it. If you'd rather not be the one to talk to it, bounce it back. But I think we want to get everybody engaged in the conversation. I would be happy at the end if unlike these meetings where I don't think I talk the least, I'd be very happy in this meeting if I was the one who talked the least.
And just one more thing. I think it's good to maybe do bigger picture items instead of focusing on specific project updates at the study session. Of course, if a council member asks, that would be appropriate, but we don't want to get into a discussion about a particular project necessarily, as much as, big picture priorities. What does the commission want to move the needle on? What sorts of policy issues are there that the commission would like to see come forward or changed in some way? So that, again, that's just my recommendation.
Yeah, I'm assuming that in this dialogue, we may not have answers. It may be that they will ask us questions and give us several months' worth of work to do because of this, rather than us being able to answer all their questions right there in that 60 minutes. Is that right?
That has happened with other commissions as well. So, I mean, just something to consider. Something happened like that with the Human Relations Commission. They did get a project out of their study session, but they were happy to take it on. But, you know, staff can help with that if it seems to be too much or out of the realm of what you're interested in. You know, we can follow up afterwards.
The example that we had here was funding. Mayor Scharf said, well, what about funding the entire 20-year Parks Master Plan tomorrow? Can you do it? And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we could fund it, and we didn't get very far, but we spent a lot of time on it.
And I thought it was very generous of Commissioner Moss to say that the council might give us more work. Does anybody else have any comments? If not, I think I would redraft this a bit, find a way. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Carmack.
The good news is that for the first time we're evenly matched, right? It's 7 on 7, so.
Right.
So that's good. You won't be completely outnumbered. I just want to address head-on what Commissioner McCauley brought up. It's actually already in the press, and there are some very strong language that some people are using. So I think we should all be prepared in case this becomes an issue that is relevant to the people who live here and, frankly, to people who don't live here. So I would, it's totally up to the commission. I'm not taking a position on whether you should or should not bring it forward. In my experience, things that can be controversial are best well thought out in advance. So if you decide to bring it up, fine. If you don't, that's fine also. It doesn't mean you can't work on it. I just encourage you to think long and hard. We would certainly, I would expect the council, as we always do, look to our boards and commissions to make recommendations and manage initial hearings on that line. So I just want to address it head on. It is a topic in the news. And so this would be the appropriate place for it to be considered.
One thing I should add is it's possible that after we shut up and start listening, one of the council members may bring it up. So if they want to bring it up, I have no problem with that. If they have some insight to guide us, I think it'd be appropriate.
And I think the important thing that we've just been reminded of is, therefore, we need to be well prepared, I think would be the message. Greenfield?
Yes, I have some more comments on the Foothills Park access issue. I was waiting till we finished talking about the bigger picture of how we're going to handle our joint session.
Can I just want to make sure this isn't an agendized item so we don't get into a discussion on it.
I'm just passing on comments from the mayor session.
Oh, okay, great.
Some additional comments.
Thank you.
Yes. We did broach the subject at the meeting, which is probably clear but wasn't explicitly stated. In addition to the question of what problem are we trying to solve, other questions that were posed for us to consider are, is there significant unserved demand? Also, what are options to addressing this issue? So if the issue does exist and there is demand, does Foothill Park need to be used as part of the solution, or are there other solutions in place, or is there demand being met by other open space areas already? And the underlying question as well, which I think maybe we got some answer to just now, is what is the appropriateness or priority of using staff resources for investigation of this effort. If this is something that council isn't going to support, then we're not well served to use staff time on this. It's a bit of a chicken and the egg issue here that we need to figure out how to get guidance on this before we were shut down from pursuing it.
Yeah, I appreciate, please go ahead.
May I just, slightly different recollection. What I remember talking about is prioritization. So, we all have to choose what are the things we're working on and where do we want to spend our time. And if this is what the commission wants to prioritize, then that's appropriate. If there are other things that the commission wants to prioritize, that's appropriate as well. I don't recall discussing, I didn't personally talk about staff time. It might have been someone else in the meeting. So just, really more about prioritization. If it's at the top of the list, then you should talk about it with us. If there are other things that are more important, then I encourage you to put those at the top of the list. It's agnostic as to the topic.
Commissioner Cawley?
So we can perhaps talk about this a little bit more when we get to the ad hoc committee updates, but I was just going to say, as a general matter, from my limited experience at being one of these study sessions previously, I think it makes a lot of sense to be as structured as possible. So your TikTok idea, Don, I think is a very good one. And without stepping on any feet, because I recognize that we view our council members as sort of our bosses in this context, which is appropriate, but I think that you as the chairman need to be assertive to actually keep us on schedule, because I recognize that the last time we went through this exercise, it's easy with council members to go off on lots of different tangents and down many different rabbit holes. So I would be assertive. That's my one last piece of input.
Thank you. Commissioner Greenfield?
Yes, one other comment I'd like to make, not related to any specific item for discussion, but in general for the meeting between the Park and Rec Commission, the Parks and Rec Commission and City Council. The last time we met was almost 2 years ago. So we didn't get a meeting scheduled in last year. So I'd like to recommend that we put calendar reminder items to start next February or so, looking to schedule the mayor's meeting, which would be followed by the joint session, so we can make sure to include this next year. Because I think it is valuable time where, as Commissioner McCauley alluded, we're meeting with our bosses at this meeting, and so we do these one-on-ones at least once a year. Seems like a reasonable practice.
I'll just point out that we all serve the public.
So with that, unless anybody has more comments, then I'll work with Commissioner Greenfield and do a little more homework, find a way to appropriately distribute it, and commit to you now that my goal would be to make sure it's a discussion that we learn from it, and that it's not my conversation, it's everybody participating in the conversation. And you're free to kick me in the shins whenever that's inappropriate. So with that, I would like to suggest that we actually move on to the next topic, which is
I guess I have one question. The fact that we haven't had a meeting in 2 years, do you want the accomplishments to be listed for the last 2 years or just for 2018?
As soon as Commissioner Greenfield said that, I made a note to think to myself back to the previous year. I don't think I'd want to go through all the accomplishments, but if we did a moonshot the previous year, then we should add the moonshot in there. If that makes sense. So
yeah, especially if there's any open issues with any of the projects that we did in the past also.
Right, so if there's any particular accomplishments that anybody's particularly sensitive to, then I think if they could inform Natalie to keep me out of Brown Act problems or whatever, and then I can work with Natalie to collect them. Is that fair? Thank you, Natalie. Even if you don't know what you just signed up for. Any other comments on that? In that case, Relative to the agenda, I don't know that we're looking for more things to put on the agenda as opposed to things to move on the agenda. Maybe Kristen can give us a little input of what's in front of us.
I can. I wanted to, the next item is the other ad hoc committee updates. Did you want to?
I'm sorry, I skipped that.
That's okay.
I'm not doing a good job of keeping in control here. I would invite Commissioner Greenfield, since it's in front of us, and he's done a nice job of championing this, to make comments on what we have in front of us.
Thank you. And so actually what I recommended a little bit more streamlined approach, which isn't exactly what's in front of us, but
it's okay.
It's similar, more similar to what we used a couple years ago, where rather than adding the meeting date and attendees, just simplify things, put things into a single column with all the update information, put things in a format that Natalie can paste right into this document, and each monthly update would be in a single column, and the document would be updated. Basically, a new column would be inserted for the new month, and the previous month would get shifted to the right. So then you could see a history of what all the updates were for each of the particular ad hocs or liaison roles as well. We can either have separate tabs in a document for ad hocs and liaisons, or everything sequentially in one document. It would be nice if there were a location that could be hosted where everyone can access this document. I don't think we should have Brown Act issues. If all of this information is presented in a meeting, then it's public information, and I think it would be very useful for the records. For the individual ad hocs to see what's happening month to month, a year later we can at a glance see, is it worth our time to have this ad hoc? It would make more sense to reduce it to a one-person liaison role. This is something we need at all, et cetera.
So I'm going to suggest that we continue to discuss and work on that, and work with Natalie and Kristen. Does anybody have, the idea was that we didn't spend a lot of time on this because we already had the information here. Does anybody have a burning interest in commenting on anything on here that either they submitted or they see?
And can I just add, the reason why it's not printed is because there were last-minute additions. So our goal is to, and working with Commissioner Greenfield, and Natalie and I will work on it too, is just to get it on a monthly same schedule, so you're all expecting that it's coming, we're expecting the response, and we'll be able to, track it as we move along. So it is a work in progress, but
well, and I have to say this is a great improvement from last month when Commissioner Greenfield was the only one who submitted something. Now we have pretty well anywhere, anytime there was something submitted or an ad hoc happened, we've got a decent report. So I appreciate everybody's participation in that.
An important part of the process is for Natalie to send the commission a reminder X number of days, three or 4 days before you need the reports done, and then we need to be disciplined in making sure we do get a report in. The goal is for each ad hoc to send in a report of some form, even if it's no update this month, which will be reasonable some months, but the goal is that most months an ad hoc will be doing something. It doesn't have to be formal meeting notes from gathering as a meeting. A lot can be done online together, or reviewing an update. For example, the pickleball plan was reviewed by the Park and Facility Use Policy ad hoc this past month, but the ad hoc didn't actually meet.
Okay, are there any incremental additions that people would like to talk about, liaison meetings or anything else?
May I offer, go ahead, if David, you'd
Commissioner
like to go
McCauley?
first. I was going to just offer a quick suggestion. Maybe it will be easy, and I think that's the case, and I hope it will be something that would streamline this. So would be to remove a couple of these columns, as Jeff was mentioning, and you can figure out which columns to keep and whatnot. That doesn't really matter so much. Definitely you're going to keep the status update column, and perhaps you just keep in one spreadsheet or one document the prior status update, so that you have, last month and this month. And that way, it's really easy. You can just, move it over. And create the column.
If I could speak to that is exactly the plan. It would be 4 columns. It would be the ad hoc group, the members of the ad hoc, the staff liaison of the ad hoc, and the current month's update. That's all that would be in the packets that would show up on a monthly basis. And the master document would include all of the extra columns, exactly as you've envisioned.
Great. And then I would like to talk about the Foothills issue just very briefly again.
Sure.
But we can talk about other items first so that they get their due.
If we're not careful here, I'm going to create an ad hoc to create ad hoc reports. I would like to add one thing this afternoon. This morning I got a call from Bob Moss, the chairman of the Library Commission. He and the commission is asking for a joint session with the Parks and Rec Commission and the Library Commission. I've suggested that we have a pretty heavy agendas for the next several months, and agreed that we should set up a ad hoc again to meet with a couple of their people. They have 5 commissioners, so 2 would be the right number for them. If I could get 2 volunteers from here to meet with them to sort of plan a joint session, I think that would be appropriate if anybody's interested in helping with that. And if nobody's interested in helping with that, then, David, thank you. Then I'll see if we can find somebody else to work with them on that, because I think it's important that we plan this. We need to know what it is we're trying to achieve, and not just have the 2 groups. Certainly, we don't have agenda time in the short term to do that. Is there any other liaison topics that haven't been discussed, David?
I have several questions about the purpose and the use of this, not the specifics. I'm going to suggest that that we not spend more time worrying about the reporting format. That maybe people could submit comments and questions about the reporting format to Natalie. Natalie can work with Commissioner Greenfield and Kristen to come up with something that works for them as well as works for us. That was not my question. My question was, what do we do with this information in this meeting? Do I ask questions about the Foothill Park status?
Yes. So the idea is we don't have to have presentations. You should have read this ahead of time. Yeah. If you've got a question about it, then now's the time to ask the question.
Well, do I ask it in the meeting, or do I just email the attendees?
Right now.
Okay, so for the Foothills Park, the 2 questions I have is, I've always thought that there ought to be a Los Altos Day or a Menlo Park Day or whatever, and I'm wondering if the ad hoc can discuss that as well. And then the other thing is, when you talk about the next steps for 7.7 acres, when will we have when will that be an agenda item? How close are you to having an agenda item, having that be an agenda item?
I'll look to Darren, but I think the answer is that there's a public outreach process that needs to happen in the first instance, and some design conceptualization that will go along with the public outreach process. So I expect that it's going to be, late this year, perhaps at the earliest.
Yeah, I think that's correct. That's exactly it. Would we need to identify funding before we pursue a public outreach process?
No, I don't think so. I think we keep funding in mind, of course, throughout the process, but I don't think, as you know, with our capital program, we cannot submit a project before it's been planned out. So no placeholders. So if the funding is indeed coming from our capital program, no. However, what we could do, though, is engage with our partners to figure out what's doable within the partnership and existing resources there. And I think we've been talking about with the ad hoc to some degree with some of our very preliminary thinking on 7.7 acres that would be part of it. In fact, we've already engaged grassroots ecology. They've already given me a conceptual plan for what we could do, and now it's the vetting process, work that through with the ad hoc, and as you say, agendize it here with the commission.
So with respect to the Foothills Park Neighbor Days, or whatever we might kind of call that concept, the committee hasn't discussed it further from when, David, you raised it this past October, I think it was. The two items that we've discussed, and the principal one is providing access for students. The other one that we've kicked around a little bit, and actually, this is also, forgive me, but there's two different committees that both kind of have a stake in this. The other is the Parks Rules and Regulations, because allowing people who are not residents of Palo Alto into the park requires amendment of the Park Rules and Regulations, the Park Municipal Code. So anyway, we've talked as well at a very high level about some of the partner organizations like Canopy, environmental volunteers, grassroots ecology, although grassroots ecology is obviously down in the park, so they don't quite have the same issue, but providing access to some of their volunteers who are doing good work in Palo Alto, but otherwise wouldn't be able to access Foothills Park. So I think those are the two main ones that we've talked about so far. In terms of the Neighbor Days, I certainly would be open to the idea. It probably needs to be fleshed out how we go about it, and I welcome your thoughts on that.
Are there any other comments on that?
So if you don't mind, I'll try to be very brief, but I'll take 60 seconds to talk about what the ad hoc has come up with thus far on the Foothills access for students from neighboring communities.
I just want to, I'm not sure if we can have, we're getting into a discussion item that wasn't agendized, so.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be, I'll be very careful not to make it a discussion, but rather just an update of where things kind of stand. So the proposal that's certainly on the table at the moment is to allow PAUSD students who are not residents of Palo Alto, as well as students from neighboring communities in school districts that under state standards are determined to be socioeconomically disadvantaged. The only school district that would apply to is Ravenswood. And to allow them access to the park as a pilot for a one-year period, study the effects, if any, and then come back and make a more permanent recommendation whether to allow those people into the park on a more permanent basis. Darren and his ranger staff have been excellent in providing feedback on that proposal. We first talked about it in the ad hoc this past October, I believe it was. And we've talked about it at a number of meetings since then. So that's what the proposal within the ad hoc is at the moment. I'd also say that John Aiken has provided some input and feedback from the recreation side and other recreation programs that are happening in the park already. So anyway, I just wanted everyone to have a sense for what that was. And I think it'll be coming before the commission. I don't know what our agenda will look like in the next couple of months, but probably before too long, it'll be before the entire commission to weigh in on.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask Kristen to go to the item I talked about before. Now we can talk about the future agenda.
Sure. So May is looking to be a pretty busy month so far. So Darren will be here with our Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan consultant to present the draft conservation plan. So that's going to be a pretty big item. And we also have two parks projects. One is Peter Jensen will be coming back with the Rinconada Park Improvement Ordinance, asking for a recommendation for the commission to recommend that council approve it. And then he was also planning on coming back potentially with a proposed plan for Bulware Park, which is due for park renovation. That will not be a PIO, but it will just be an introduction to what his proposal is there.
So in the short term, we're pretty well set with what we're bringing forward.
That's right.
Are there any other comments or announcements?
I would just say that the park, the rules and regulations ad hoc is looking forward to coming to the commissions soon with potentially a discussion item of rule changes, and which would be followed by a PIO, a recommendation. Is it PIO? No, it's just an action
That's
for
right,
approval.
just an
Excuse me.
action
This could either be a single agenda item to approve the action in a single meeting, or there'd been an opportunity for review, discussion, and amendments to that in a follow-up meeting. So I think we would probably be on target for having some discussion in the June agenda.
I think that's reasonable.
Thank you. Out of left field, I'm going to mention one other thing that came out of the meeting with the mayor and Councilmember Cormack. At the last meeting, I did mention that we have had an awful lot of climate change related presentations, GSI and the trees and so on, and that it would be interesting to know if there was an overarching committee or look at that within the city. Councilmember Cormack suggested there was, what was it, a committee or that was going to look at that, and suggested that maybe somebody from the Parks and Rec Commission would join that. I'm mentioning that now as a reminder to all of us that I think that would be something that would be really useful if we could do it.
That was embedded in the staff report for our Earth Day study session, that there will be a group coming forward. It was just one sentence. There wasn't anything more on that, but I think that'd be certainly worth considering.
Thank you. With that, if there are, I knew there would be.
Yeah, there is. So I wanted to bring up Coverly as a potential agenda item for next meeting in May. Is this something that would be appropriate for us to be scheduling in?
Yeah, we talked about that. I'm worried about May going till midnight. So once I have a council date for when, so the plan is for Coverly is we'll likely go to council, just a council meeting, not a joint study session with the school district, just to talk about certain aspects of Coverly, one being housing. And the school district will have a similar meeting with their board, and then we'll do the joint study session later. So the timing on when we come to the Parks and Rec Commission is important, I agree. And I can see about whether Rinconada and Bulware Park could move from the agenda. I expect that will also be a rather lengthy item, so I'm just trying to be respectful of commissioners' time limits. So we'll work with you and Chair McDougall on that.
I agree that we shouldn't be aiming for more than 3 agenda items, but the question is, would Coverly be higher priority than one of the park discussions for that meeting? And that's exactly what I'm hearing from you, that may be the case, and we'll talk about it.
Sure. Thanks for the reminder.
The one comment I'd like to make is the slides that you went over at the last city school meeting I thought were very good. Mm-hmm. And I think you go over them in 10, 15 minutes and just for information only, and not so much getting our opinions, but just keeping us in the loop. That might be some value added there.
Sure.
And since there's already prepared, it would be minimal preparation on your part.
Right. And I forgot to mention earlier, May 9th is our next Cubberley Community Meeting. It's our final meeting. I really hope that you all come and help spread the word. It's 7 o'clock, again, at the Cubberley Pavilion on Thursday, May 9th. How could I forget that?
If there's nothing else,
But this is the earliest we've finished a meeting in a very long time, so I don't feel necessary to be really short-winded. So on the topic of park dedication, Jeff, you were suggesting you might want some help or assistance. I'd be more than happy to help. Should we have that be an actual ad hoc?
So it was an ad hoc last year at the retreat. This year, I was the only one interested, so we decided one person does not make an ad hoc, so I became the liaison. I think we could easily open it up as an ad hoc again.
are you volunteering?
I am, yes.
So why don't
If
I work
others are in
with
agreement
Kristen
with
and
that
we'll formalize that as an ad hoc.
One more question. Are we going to have a boardwalk grand opening? Because the last one got rained out.
Yeah, that's with Public Works Engineering right now, and they have not rescheduled one. As soon as they do, I'll be sure to let you know.
I'm afraid to ask.
Just ask for a motion.
Yeah, I'm going to ask for a motion specifically to adjourn. I can't believe I can't get a motion to adjourn. You guys would like to continue? Thank you, Ryan.
I second.
Thank you, Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you all very much.